So let's try to pull this together as we end a lot of the material for this class by looking at some common themes and patterns in world history. One of the main themes that we've seen is the existence and even the importance of trade. We start with small trade, obviously, with nomadic groups sharing information and goods that early civilizations and early societies needed, and really moving into the period from the classical period onward of massive intrastate and interstate trade. We've seen this with a couple of options in terms of very specific routes, including the Silk Roads, which essentially connected China to Europe, although there were multiple routes over land around the Taklamakan Desert and then connecting with smaller trade routes in India, in the Middle East, in the Byzantine Empire. We also saw maritime routes starting around the 7th century, also connecting China to Europe, but in a slightly more convoluted way, from using the Indian Ocean and maybe the Red Sea or sub-Saharan routes, or routes using Arabia and going up into the Byzantine lands that way. The maritime routes, while more convoluted, sometimes would be safer because you would not have to go through quite so many different kingdoms. And these merchant firms that connected together to create this trade spread goods and oftentimes ideas. Inadvertently, we've seen examples of the spread of disease, including catastrophic disease. And the Silk Roads, because several people traveled on them, also were a conduit for spreading religion. We've seen Buddhism spread, Islam, Christianity, Zoroastrianism across these routes. At times, the trade helped to strengthen states. If you are the leader of a state and you get a lot of income and your economy is strong, then you have money to play with. You have money to pay soldiers. You have money to win, essentially, any kind of game where you can access more technology. You also, though, see some trade being able to destroy states, and mostly by sometimes being overly successful and getting the attention of somebody looking to attack you, or not being able to maintain healthy trade. We did see the trans-Saharan trade routes towards the end of the class, also multiple routes connecting ports from the Indian Ocean, primarily the Swahili coast, through Africa and to ports on the west and northern coasts, so the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. And we saw how religion spread there as well, in addition to goods and ideas. And again, some trade managed to strengthen states. Think about Mali, think about Songhai. But it also could, if you were particularly successful, destroy states, such as Ghana. So think about examples for this. I mean, these are our patterns that we're starting to see. Another pattern that we see is the use of religion by states. And although the use changes over time, the fact that belief systems are used to justify rule is a long-standing pattern. So in the early years, we saw rulers claiming that they were descended from the gods, or they were intermediaries with the gods. And we saw the weaknesses of that as well as the strengths. Think about the Shang dynasty, for instance, and the success of an uprising meant that the Shang had lost the mandate from heaven. religion will be used as a unifying force, but also in many ways as a policing force. It will allow for interactions between states, sometimes, not always, good interactions, favorable interactions between states that have the same religion. There are definitely exceptions to the rule where similar states would fight each other for territory. But if you were talking about states with different religions, such as Christianity and Islam, then the interactions usually turned violent. The Crusades are a great example of that. The dance over the Iberian Peninsula and who would control that, also an example. But religion can unify empires. In fact, both Christianity and Islam have terms for land that is populated and under the control of their religions. The Christians refer to Christendom. So Western Europe largely was referred to throughout this time as Christendom. The Muslims call the land under Muslim control Dar al-Islam. And this idea isn't that everyone is behaving the same way. It's that everyone has the same code of ethics that's meant to guide, to control their behavior. Finally, we can also look at why states fail. And there are several reasons why states fail. These are just some of them. We've seen different examples of internal unrest bringing up problems, whether it's dynastic struggles, fights over who succeeds the king or the caliph or the khan, or the commoners rising up, the rabble, who usually have very little voice until they unite and successfully take down the government. We also see evidence of system failure, when empires are too big to be protected, or when populations overspend the food supply, or there's an epidemic that can't be stopped. In addition, there are external factors, attackers. That's obviously connected to the system failure, but attackers coming in, and so many examples of not necessarily just nomadic, but boy, those Mongols provide a great example of taking down existing states. We also have, as an external factor, climate change or an environmental disaster. There are times when there's things where the weather just doesn't support agriculture that well. The mini ice age in the 6th century CE brought about a point in time where the weather was terrible. It was cold, it was rainy, and while water is good for crops, too much water is not. An environmental disaster, like our friends in the Indus River Valley with the repeated floodings, or the Messenians, or the Minoans with their earthquakes. A lot of different elements can bring about the end of a state. And so these are the kinds of themes I want you to think about. What have you learned that would fall into these themes? Have I missed any? Probably.